Today, I am answering listener questions. This is something I do exclusive to my list. If you want to be on my list, sales pitch, link below the player. You also get the podcast about 3 days before the general public does, if that type of thing is important to you. Previous guests we've featured include Richard Spavin, John Riley, Dan Weiss, Zach Grooves. We're going to have a lot more exciting guests for you, so you probably want to grab that. Anyway, people on my list sent me questions. We decided to do a Q&A, the first 80/20 pod Q&A. So here we go. Dylan asks, do you have any thoughts on learning harmony ear training in order to follow song forms better? Or is hearing the melody more important? I feel very stilted when I'm trying to count bars, and I'm looking for ways to keep the form in more musical ways. I think learning harmony is really, really important. And what I would do is get like a basic ear training book and start working out like 2-5-1s and minor 2-5-1s on a piano. If you can differentiate major, minor, major 7, dominant 7, minor 7 chords on a piano, if you just know how to make those shapes, then in a couple hours, you can teach yourself to voice lead things like 2-5-1s. Once you have 2-5s in your head, you'll start to be able to listen to basic jazz songs, like from the Great American Songbook, and hear them everywhere you see them. You'll learn common forms like rhythm changes, blues or sort of bebop blues that has 2-5s in there. By the way, a 2-5 is just a very common resolution in all Western music, but particularly in jazz. You just have a 2 chord, which if you envision the C major scale is the chord built off of the second scale degree, hence it's called the 2. DFA, going to the 5 chord, GBDF, the dominant 7th, going back to the 1, CEGB, if you're going to the major 7th. For those of you I haven't completely bored, you can learn to voice lead those in easy ways, probably just by picking up a basic jazz piano book. I was forced to study all this stuff in college. In undergrad, I did classical percussion, so I actually took 4 years of classical theory. And in grad school, obviously, there was a jazz piano requirement, so this stuff kind of got hammered into my head. I will say, understanding harmony and seeing harmony everywhere you look feels like it's a key to unlock things. I have a couple coaching students who are learning jazz songs, and grasping the basic harmony is huge, huge, huge. Okay, for those of you still here, question 2. Sal, who's a former student and all-around great guy, says, hey, Nate, and I'm paraphrasing, what are the main things you think are missing in today's drum instruction? So this one's easy, improvisation. And actually, I'm going to have a conversation tomorrow with one Mr. J.P. Bouvet about this, which will probably publish a week from then. But yeah, I built my whole thing around this, or at least my whole recent thing. This is the thing that my whole group coaching program is geared around, which is basically that it's really, really easy to teach somebody a rudiment or a pattern or a shape. And it's really, really difficult to stair step them to using that. So one of the most common things I hear from people who hit me up for lessons, people who ask me questions in the inbox or Instagram or whatever, is I'm practicing all this stuff. It's not coming out in my playing, right? Like super familiar. And part of the reason is it just takes time. Eventually it's all going to work its way in there. But another part of the reason is that a lot of drummers don't seem like they're super well equipped to practice improvising. There's either fully working on written out vocabulary, reading down a page, or else there's throw you in the deep end. You now need to improvise something with all the drum vocabulary in the world. And a few of the things we do in my programs, and I'm not the only one, but I arrived at these independently, are things like taking 2 kernels of ideas that you've learned really well and mix and matching in them and interchanging them so that the improv is how you put those together. It's not just freewheeling, throw you in the deep end. Another one I like to do that's in my coaching course that's everywhere is called the looping exercise, where you improvise a phrase, but then you restrict yourself to like a bar or 2 bars, and then you just repeat that over and over again until it's satisfactory to you. And then you have to improvise again. So these are all sorts of ways to stair step your way to full improvisation, where you're keeping your brain on playing an idea kernel. My friend Jacob calls words and sentences that you've learned, but you're also introducing improvisation gradually. I think those are some of the really cool things to do, but they're difficult to do because, I don't know, I guess because it was easy to sell books and drum materials before without putting them in. I think more and more people are getting hip to them now, but I still think that's the biggest thing missing from drum instruction. All right, moving on. Todd asks, my question is, what exercises or techniques can I use to increase my speed so I can play 16th notes on the hi-hat or the ride with my right hand at 100 BPM? Let's see what 100 BPM is. So he wants to play 100 BPM with one hand. Okay. Basically, there are two approaches to this. One's fast twitch, one's molar. You're going to use a combination of the two. In very brief, you want to study things that allow you to maximize the bounce of the stick when you drop it, and then retract your wrist so that you can make an even stroke when you catch it. I taught an in-person lesson on this, and we spent an hour and 15 on this. But there are materials out there. I'm publishing some soon. Gordy Knudsen is a great resource on this. But that stuff's not really a mystery. There's a science of the drop catch stroke. I'll actually link to a video where I talk about this. And the major innovation I've come up with recently is actually forcing it. If you're playing French on the ride cymbal, you can actually start with the stick and extend your fingers. So you retract the stick while keeping your back fingers on the stick. You're exerting kind of like a little pneumatic pressure within your hand. If you're playing American grip, as you would on the snare drum or the pad or the hats, you can do the same thing. You can create a little pneumatic pressure and actually extend your fingers and then let the stick come back. So you can practice that really slowly. You can raise your wrist and play a tap stroke on the pad and then force the stick to rebound as much as possible and then retract it. And you can practice this. This is a way to practice slow to fast with this. And what you're doing is you're creating a big cache of potential energy in the stick, because stick height is potential energy, like the stick falling is kinetic energy, whatever. I'm not a physicist. I think that's pretty basic though. So you're creating a whole store of extra potential energy, which you're going to use when you allow your wrist to retract and the stick to fall. So that's the basic technique there. And then how do you get faster with it? Just time. Play, increase the BPM with it, practice it on the hats. And the other thing you can do is you can practice playing dik-git-da, dik-git-da, dik-git-da. You don't have to play every 16th at first. There are a lot of little tricks for that. Hopefully that helps, Todd. Don has a similar question. He asks, how to play smooth, relaxed hip time with brushes when you're playing stuff like Cherokee and other unusually speedy tunes at tempos of 200 BPM and up. So 200 BPM is just going to be 100 BPM on the half note. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. That's actually not that quick. I think my answer to that at 200 BPM, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, would just be to use a tap stroke with the brush. Tick, 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 tick. If you want to learn to do that, I'll link to a recent lesson I did on the ride cymbal. I think I have one on the Tony Williams ride cymbal, but there's one on the basic ride cymbal as well. And it's just an extension of what I was talking about with the previous question. When you apply that to the brushes, the muscle memory is going to be a little bit different, but it's pretty similar. I think what he's getting at, though, is like tempos that feel really fast for you. And this is a hard one to put into words without actually demonstrating, but long story short, there are sort of shortcuts you can use where you play idiomatic things like da 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 dee da 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 da, right? We're going to be singing a lot of stuff. I've got videos on this as well, but like the previous one, it's a combination of increasing your facility little by little while you practice these idioms that allow you to cheat slightly, and then hopefully they meet. There's also a right, left, right, right, left, right, right technique where you're swishing back and forth. And that's kind of the Ed Soph up-tempo technique that a lot of people teach. You can just search Ed Soph or search me and Ed Soph technique. I've done a lot of stuff on Ed's stuff. So that would be my answer. Moving on. Okay, this is a long one, and I don't know if I have this guy's permission to use his name, but he says, hey, Nate, could you address micro timing and bending into and out of different subdivisions of the beat, like triplets and quintuplets when playing Dilla beats? Oh, it is okay to use his name. Okay, his name's Tober. So I got back to this guy and asked him, why are you asking this? Like, what's this for? Because I really like to know what people are trying to do when they're asking about a certain technique. I feel like techniques are a means to an end. So if I know what you're actually trying to accomplish, then we can talk about whether this is even the correct approach writ large. So he got back to me. He said, I'm trying to get the right feel in those stretched parts in Dilla beats. I study West African music, and one good strategy to understand time bending is an initial pulsation and a target pulsation, meaning that he's talking about the Dilla beat as being kind of arbitrarily between straight and swung. So Arthur L.A. Buckner's got a great video on this. I've got a video on his video. Basically, I've got a video on everything at this point because I'm old. But you've heard this before, but if you imagine completely duple and completely swung, one triplet, two triplet, three triplet, four triplet, one triplet, two triplet, three triplet, four triplet, then you can think of Dilla as sort of partway between those. And that's just to give you context for his question. He finishes, I've always felt like there's some bending toward away from quintuplets in Dilla beats, and even some transcriptions that use quintuplets. So I actually hinted at this on Instagram. I do not think quintuplets are the best way to play Dilla beats. I think they're an additional thing that you can modulate in and out of using Dilla beats. But just super quick example, if you think of quintuplets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you think this grouping, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. Then if you speed that up, it sounds vaguely like this Chris Dave hi-hat pattern from Dilla. So how to actually play Dilla stuff, I actually recommend practicing these two things separately. So you can absolutely practice quintuplet beats, and I would just practice playing in 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then practice dividing that bar in half. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. These are existing in 2 separate universes. In Dilla universe, you're just listening to a lot of recordings. Classic Dilla stuff, Chris Dave, of course, Perrin Moss, like all the people, basically everything on Zildjian Underground. Butcher Brown, Spanky, his band Spank, and then just the whole neo soul genre on Spotify, and just getting that in your head so that you're sitting down and you're going, because it's not just the halfway between straight and swung. There are idiomatic things to do with the hats. The snare drum is a little bit early in some places. And keep in mind, Dilla and all of these beat makers were copying and pasting things. So when people say the Dilla beat, they mean like one particular Dilla beat. He made a bunch of others, but it's that sort of Chris Dave Dilla beat we're talking about. So personally, I got that in my head just by shedding it over and over and over and over again until it felt natural. And I agree, Tober, with your, what do you call it? I would say principal pulsation and target pulsation. So it's somewhere between straight and swung, you're locating that. And then when you have a Dilla beat that's pretty well internalized, and then you also have quintuplet stuff in your head, then you can use the Dilla beat as like a transition from 4 to 5, and then go fully into 5 and lean on the 5. I'm just not of the opinion that 5 is the same thing as Dilla beats. Hope that makes sense. So I think we'll take one or two more and then leave it for now. I'll try to get to the other ones in another podcast. Again, we'll be doing more of these. If you guys want to have your question read on the podcast, just subscribe at the8020drummer.com or click the link below this video if you're watching on YouTube. And that's it. You'll get the email that you can reply to asking for your questions. And you also get the podcast early. Okay. Possibly last question. Somebody who didn't give me permission to use his name says, where do you find satisfaction in what you do? I swear I'm not gaslighting you. Need to think about this without dead air. Where do I find a satisfaction? So I haven't really rank ordered this, but I'll give you two off the top of my head. One is in content creation. Okay, I'll give you three things. So one is just making my playing better in public and using the channel as an impetus to make my playing better, which is just a lot of fun whenever I'm doing a Could Nate Do the Gig or like learning tom sweeps as we did 2 weeks ago or anything else. It's always a fun challenge to get myself up to that level. If you've made it this deep in the podcast, I'll also acknowledge that there are some disgruntled people on the internet who are taking issue with me and some other so-called internet educator drummers saying we don't have the chops. That makes me really mad, so I want to actually have the chops. I think I'm getting closer. I think I'm getting a lot closer, to be honest. I don't think responding to negativity is productive, but I think using it to fuel you is, maybe. And then finally, actually working with my students is a huge one too. Like I've got 4 and counting one-on-one jazz coaching students. And I've had something like 16 or 17 students do the group program in the past year. And that just involves watching them play, watching them make progress, and then jumping in on live workshops with them and answering their questions. And that's one of my favorite things to do these days. So, also sharing my videos, the thrill of being artistically naked in public, challenging myself to do stuff like the clinic tour, like drum festivals, if those come my way. All super fun. Yeah, so really, really enjoying all of it. Let's take one more, but let's be super judicious. All right. Another guy who I don't know if I have permission to use his name says, I think this is common that we want too many things too fast, and developing skills takes time, but nobody talks about how much time. So how much time does it take to play a shuffle at a high rate or play jazz at 250, another sort of arbitrary metronome mark, or sextuplets with the bass drum at a high rate? Nobody tells you if it takes 3 months of dedicated work or a whole life. I'm fond of saying, and this is, a little bit of a meme, but I think it's largely accurate, that give me anybody who thinks they don't have what it takes and let them practice an hour a day for 10 years, and I bet they'll be killer. So, short answer, 10 years, and the real differentiator is consistency. Like, are you putting in the time every single day? Because what separates most people from their dreams is other priorities interfere. And that's as it should be. If you wanted to be a drummer, but then you realize having a family and a career is more important to you, then you should deprioritize drums unless you're a sociopath. But for people who make that a priority, it's hard to see that they're going to fail. And it almost reminds me of like cheating on a diet when people are like, I don't understand. I calorie restricted and I still gained weight. And I'm like, did you? Did you really? I'm a still fan of podcasts like More Plates, More Dates and Mike Israetel. And those guys are great on the fitness and nutrition stuff, pro tips. But yeah, usually it's the same thing. It's like, I practiced every day for 10 years and I still suck. It's like, did you? I'm going to practically guarantee. I'll bet a gajillion dollars that you did not practice every single day. I think it's really, really, really hard to fail if you have consistency. And sales pitch, my whole thing is like, I think that with good instruction, you can shorten that learning curve. And an example I use is when I went to Interlochen. When I was on one trajectory, I was growing up in Montana, just proto the internet and the drum internet being a huge thing. And I had one idea about the level I needed to be at and the expectations and the work ethic. I went to Interlochen music camp, and that completely changed my perception of things. I was exposed to people for whom it was a norm to overachieve and to work super hard. So I got to see what that looked like. People who were talking about, I want to play with this symphony or go to that school, just like it was normal. They're like, oh, I applied to Eastman. Where are you going? Juilliard, Curtis? When in my previous musical environment, that would have been like super high up. It was just the norm for these people. And also just the level, seeing like where the level was at. And I've said this to a few people. In my coaching, I aim to create similar breakthroughs for people, blah, 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 blah. So it still takes time. It still takes consistency. But I think a good teacher or coach can give you a proof of concept by sort of taking you by the hand and leading you through a breakthrough so you understand it's possible. And then you can reverse engineer what you did for that breakthrough and create future breakthroughs. I think with all those things in place, it's still like a 7 to 10 year journey. And I know you're asking about specific things like playing a shuffle at a high rate. Here's the other thing. If you practice consistently and listen and seek out good teachers for 5 years, you're not going to be phrasing the question like that in 5 years. Had a lesson with the great Jamie Haddad a couple decades ago. I'm ancient. And he made a comparison like this. He's like, how many different beats do you think Elvin Jones knows? And that's one of those you just leave it silent things. It's like, yeah, it's true. Like a few variations he does, but it's all kind of coming from the same bailiwick, shall we say. And yes, as you're getting better, shuffles or specific stuff is stuff you're going to be learning, but really it's about time and playing clean and your improvisational flow and learning songs quickly and being able to lock up with the band. And then you layer things like specialty feels on top of that. And sure, if you grow up in Texas playing Texas shuffles in a bar, your shuffle is going to be stronger. It's just like accents and language. You're going to be a native speaker in some things and you're going to be a foreigner in other things. But you want to be developing your own voice, just like your own voice in your native language, so that you can speak clearly and then you can decide what you want to say. And on that note, you guys, we'll wrap it up. Thanks again for tuning into this first ever 80/20 Q&A podcast. One more time, if you want to have your questions read on a future podcast, just subscribe to the list by clicking below, or if you're listening to this on audio, going to the8020drummer.com and subscribing. See you guys in a future one.